everybody, welcome to the Fire It Up with CJ show. Today we're here with Dr. Arthur Sierra McCauley, and we're talking about the book, The Stress Solution. Thank goodness for this book. It's perfect timing. So welcome,
Thank you,
Arthur.
CJ. Thank
Do
you
you want
very
me to
much.
call you Arthur?
And what would be my last name?
Sierra McCauley. Or would you prefer Dr. Sierra McCauley, or should I just call you Martin for Martin Sheen? Um,
Whatever you prefer.
okay. I'll just call you Dr. Sierra McCauley. All right, so this week has been a week in which I did my taxes. Talk about putting you in, I don't know, catastrophizing
Mhm.
that you have in your book.
Your first cognitive distortion.
Yes, that's my first cognitive. I have many cognitive distortions, all of which I am experiencing almost this week. So it's a perfect time to talk about these things.
Uh-huh.
So I wanted to go back. We had this is part two of our interview. We talked a couple weeks ago about about a little bit about performance addiction, and then also about conflict resolution and such. So I wanted to touch back about performance addiction and things that people experience a lot whenever they're doing work projects. And one is performance addiction, and how it relates to perfectionism.
hmm
So can you give us kind of a high level definition of what it is and how it's different or similar to perfectionism?
Well, it relates to perfectionism because performance addiction is the belief that perfecting appearance and achieving status will secure love and respect.
Hmm.
It's an irrational belief system, and it begins in our family experiences, and it's reinforced by our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And people who have performance addiction really believe that they can perfect their way into happiness.
Hmm.
They're people who have suffered in some way early in life, and maybe not suffered in a grand way, but it suffered in some way with that they didn't feel whole, they didn't feel appreciated, they didn't feel validated. And what they noticed is they got the attention of the important people in their lives when they achieved.
Hmm.
So if you don't have the attention of your mother, your father, your siblings, the important people in your life, and all of a sudden you get the star role in a play, or you hit a home run, or you score the winning goal in soccer, and you see your father or mother clapping in the stands, you look up and you say, ah, now I've got her attention.
Yeah.
I've got his attention. So it's about achievement. That's how you get love.
Right. And that happens to so many people in this society. And so
Yes.
the vulnerability, the core belief is that if I achieve, then I will get attention and thereby get love. Finally get
Yes.
some love, attention and love that I need.
Yes. And most people don't even realize it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they don't often realize it till later in life when they've achieved what they thought was going to bring them happiness and love and
Mm-hmm.
respect and dignity, and it failed.
Yep.
And then what's left? Then what do?
Yep. Been there,
You want
done
to
that.
achieve more. You want to earn more. You
Right.
want to get more degrees. You want to get a bigger house. You want to get a new car. Maybe you want to get a new wife or a new husband. On when new move to a new location, get a second or third home.
Mm-hmm.
Keep believing that this conditioned belief, this distorted conditioned belief, that if I achieve more, I'll finally get there. I thought I got there, but it's
Mm-hmm.
like a ladder. You know those ladders that have rungs? You think you're at the top, and then there's another rung that goes up again?
Yes.
And that's sort of what performance addiction is. It fools you into thinking that you've got to go harder, go faster, work more, and then you will receive the love that you've longed for all your life.
Hmm. It seems like our society is afflicted by this belief. I mean, it's a
Yes.
societal construct, right? Not I mean, a lot of Western societies have this kind of, and Eastern societies too. I mean, as a Chinese culture, this is definitely part of my
Yes.
cultural upbringing.
Yes.
And so, and so, what happens to our relationships when we actually are constantly like, "This is never enough. I'm grabbing on to the next rung." I mean, what happens? What's the end effect of that? I mean, it sounds like hamster on uh, a wheel, spinning wheel that you're just constantly, or gerbil on a hamster wheel,
Mhm.
or hamster
Yeah.
on a hamster wheel. Oh my
A
God.
hamster on a hamster wheel. Yes. Well,
I think the same effect of a gerbil on a hamster wheel, but
that's an interesting concept, CJ. I'm trying to picture that, like a wheel made of hamsters, and then the hamster. Okay.
yes. Thank God I'm not trying to get this interview perfect. Okay, but if you have this kind, what is the effect when you're constantly like trying to perfect things, trying to be perfect, trying to get achievement after achievement? What's the effect on your life
Well,
when you.
one of the things that happens is people with performance addiction don't know how to love.
Hmm.
So they believe that achievement brings them love. So they don't know how to slow down.
Hmm.
They don't know how to listen. They don't know how to be present. They don't know how to use empathy to see into the heart and soul of another human being. So what they end up doing is they fall in love with images. They look
Hmm.
for people who are going to embellish them in some way. Like they fall in love with someone because they're attractive, or they fall
Hmm.
in love with someone because they have money or they have status.
Hmm.
Then over time, they realize that they don't really love the person because that person stops giving them that boost in their self-worth that they're longing for. So then they've
Hmm.
got to go on to someone else. What also happens is when they're in a love relationship, they're comparing and contrasting that person to other people all the time, just
Oh,
like they
that's
do with
awful.
themselves. So
Yes.
they're taking inventory every day. Is my wife, my husband as handsome or pretty as the one next door? Or is my wife or husband making enough, as much money as the person down the street? And so they're never quite satisfied with what is. One of my clients, who's a very high achiever, said to me last week, she said, well, he's not perfect.
Hmm.
And I said, did you really think he was going to be? She goes, well, he has an MBA, he has a company, and here we are living in one house, and everyone on our street has a second home.
Oh,
I
goodness.
said, so that means he's not perfect? I
Wow.
said, he's not going to be perfect, and nobody's going to be perfect, and you're not going to be perfect. She said, that's depressing.
It is depressing because if that's the only frame in which you get love, you get recognition, you get received, and you have no other frame, and that's the only frame or only game that you've been playing, it probably is depressing because you can never win because there's always going to be someone who is better than you, has a wife or husband that's has two. Even if you got two houses, there's probably someone who has three houses. There's always going to
Yes.
be. It's a game that you never really ever feel a sense of connection. So from what I'm hearing you say, it's like you lose your connection to life itself because you're never present because you're always trying to like move so fast that you really just don't even notice what you have. And then it sounds like you're never really satisfied with your relationships because you're always comparing them to someone else that's better. That sounds
Someone else who's going to mirror back more self-esteem
right.
because of your own insecurity. And a lot of times, because people
Mm,
are so inundated with the idea of achievement brings love, that they don't understand that they don't really know how to settle down in love.
mm,
As they go on in life, and a lot of people come to me in their later 40s, 50s, 60s because they have achieved things, but they're still unhappy.
mm-hmm.
They
So,
don't have close connections with their kids, and they're highly stressed. I mean, that's why this book really is focusing on the stress in our society,
mm-hmm,
because our society puts so much emphasis on achievement and appearance, and we've lost the emphasis on character and integrity.
mm-hmm,
What about
mm-hmm,
character?
mm-hmm,
What about who we are, not just what we do? It's
mm-hmm,
important what we do. As you and I talked the last time, I mean, obviously we're both achievers. We're
mm-hmm.
we're we're doing this because I wrote a book and you have a show. So,
Right.
you're highly acclaimed and I'm not necessarily highly acclaimed, but I write books. I'm a clinical psychologist. So we are achieving. We
Mm-hmm.
are competing.
Right.
But if you fail at love, you fail at life in the end. That's the bottom.
Mm,
If you don't
mm,
know how to love, I don't care how much money you have. I don't care if you're a celebrity, professional athletes. I've treated them
mm-hmm,
as well as a blue collar person. If you don't know how to love, you're going to be highly stressed. If you're
mm-hmm.
going to be highly stressed, you're going to release the stress hormone cortisol with all the negative effects that it brings. And most of the people in our society today, I mean, 75% of Americans say they're stressed every day at work.
Right. So it's if you're not perfect. So this is if you're not. So I'm trying to make sure I understand the equation. If you're not perfect in achieving, then you won't have love. If you don't have love in your life, then you're going to be stressed. So that's the connection between performance and stress. I mean, if the more you try to perform, almost the more stress that you'll get because you're never going to be able to achieve sustainable, enriching love by achieving. Is what I'm
Right.
hearing is the equation.
Yes, achievement doesn't equal love.
Yeah. Well, there's a beautiful story in your book about your mom and your dad. Can you share that story that you have when you were talking about your mom's funeral? I think it was your mom and contrasting your mom and dad's funeral.
Oh yeah, my mom, as I mentioned to you in the first interview, she only went to the seventh grade, and her dad thought, girls have to go to work. They don't. And back then, of course, it was a major thing to graduate from high school. My father was the first one in his extended family that graduated from high school. But my mom put a great emphasis on relationships, knowing how to listen, and knowing how to love. So
Hmm.
I remember my mom saying to me once, because someone in the family married a doctor, and she said, "So we're going to this wedding, and the doctor's going to be there. Are you impressed with the doctor?" I said, "Mom, he's a doctor." She goes, "Oh, do you think he remembers your name?" I said, "Well, yeah. Don't you think he will?" She said, "No." She said, "But the butcher, the person who works at the meat market that we go to, he
Hmm.
remembers everybody's name." And he
Hmm.
often gives free food to people who don't have the money to pay for it.
Hmm.
Okay. I want you to watch the way he relates at the wedding, and I want you to watch the way the doctor you're so impressed with relates at the wedding. So we go to
Hmm.
the wedding, and he says hello, the doctor, and he doesn't say my mother's name or my father's name or my name. And she looks at me with a little smile, and then she walks past the person who works in the market, and of course he gives her a big hug, and he knows my name, and he asks me how I'm doing in sports and school, and you get the point of what she was
Right.
trying to explain.
Yeah.
And people were very much gravitating toward the person who owned the market.
Hmm.
They loved talking with him, they loved being around him. The doctor was sitting sort of alone at a table lecturing people about medicine,
Right.
which most
Right.
people I think were bored with.
Right. Yeah.
But at her wake and funeral, my father looked at me and he said, "This is like the United Nations." I said, "What do you mean, Dad?" He said, "We have every religion represented, and we have every race represented, and we have all age groups because that's who your mother was."
Hmm. Hmm.
Because my mother worked in an emergency room at the end of her life, and she would take information from people. And in those days, you could actually talk to people.
Right.
This is before HMOs. We
Right.
actually could have some time.
Right.
So the physicians would confide in her. And I tell
Hmm.
a story in the book about how this young cardiologist she met would come down and talk to her about his issues in his marriage and so forth. And then he called me one day because obviously my mother had passed several years, and he said, your mother was my first therapist, so I thought I'd call you and see if you could continue the process."
That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah. I said, "I'm not sure I'm as good as my mother, but anyway, we'll try."
Yeah. Yeah. So do you think your mom died a happy person because her life was about listening and love? Right? Did she die? Did it translate to happiness or just a sense of enrichment because she had so many enriching connections with all the United Nations of people?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer because my younger brother died when he was 23.
Mm,
And I don't think my mother ever came to terms with that or ever healed from that. And
mm,
I think in many ways she wanted to be with him.
mm.
Mother used to take naps and say, I'm still waiting to dream about your brother."
Oh, oh my
So,
goodness. Wow.
if that had not occurred, do I think she led a happy life? Yes, because she was
Yeah.
loved by many people.
Yeah.
But that had a profound effect on her, and I don't think that she ever entirely could get past that.
Yeah.
I'm not, does anybody get entirely past it? And that's a bigger question.
Yeah. Well, it's in the book you contrast it with your dad, who was very achievement oriented and have all these different things, but had a very different type of funeral, right? I thought that was the interesting story. I always think that in the this is related. It's going to sound unrelated, but it is related. During 9/11, the New York Times did these obituaries of all the different people that were in the Twin Towers, and it was interesting because as you read the eulogy, there was all these people who was like so and so was an executive VP of blah 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 blah, and they'd have these vignettes that were were great. I mean, I'm sure those people were wonderful people, but the vignettes that were so charming were the ones where it's like this person always had a smile on their face and they loved peanuts and they loved writing they used to love playing with their kids, and would go biking with their kids. Like those kinds of things were so much more. There's so much more life because it's who that person was being versus
Yes.
the types of achievements, some of which were really quite impressive when you read through the achievements of those New
Yes.
York Times interviews. But it was really similar to your story about the butcher or marketplace owner. The character of that person was so much more evident when you read like the little blurbs and heard about how they love
Yes.
peanuts and all these different types of things that have nothing to do about achievement at all.
Well,
Um,
because you related to that.
yeah,
You understand it. It gives you some, it makes you emote. You have some emotion about it. You get a
yeah,
better sense of who that human being was,
yeah.
not just reading a resume.
Yeah, yeah, which is the same as the wedding, right, that you attended, where you knew, like the marketplace guy or the butcher was
Yes.
giving someone a hug and finding it out their lives, and I mean, it's interesting. It's hard. It's hard though to get there because I think that we're surrounded with this society that is counter to this performance addiction. I mean, is counter to breaking this performance addiction. So, what are some ideas on changing that up?
Well, one of the things that's very important is to understand the capacity for empathy. Empathy is not an emotion or a feeling, it's a capacity that we're born with.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't develop it, it goes unused like an unused muscle, it atrophies.
Mm-hmm.
But empathy is the key to making deeper connections because
Mm-hmm.
empathy allows us to see beyond the surface, as I said before, into the heart and soul of another human being. And it also helps us assess people, really know people.
Mm-hmm.
And when we really know people, we know who to get close to and who to remain distant from. So
Mm-hmm.
it is an assessment tool that sort of guides us into someone's experience so that we really know who they are. But also, when you truly listen to someone, this is the most amazing, one of the most amazing things in my career. Okay. When we give and receive empathy, we produce oxytocin, that near miracle neurotransmitter. Isn't that amazing? That
Mm-hmm.
we
Just
talk
even
to each
giving
other.
empathy does that.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm empathically listening to you, and you're empathically listening to me, and we're giving each other feedback in the process. And when couples do this, or friends do this, or any two human being, it changes us. It
Mm.
produces a neurochemical, a brain change that makes us live longer. It reduces inflammation. It
Mm.
reduces addictive cravings. It helps us maintain a healthy weight. It increases our tendency to be generous. It increases empathy and it makes us feel secure and open for love.
Mm.
Just giving and receiving of empathy.
Mm. So it's almost if someone who were to try doing that, right? If you're stuck in performance addiction and you try to just start giving empathy to another person, you would start getting the benefits of, oh wow, I like
Yes.
connecting with people. Oh, it
Yeah.
actually feels good to connect with people. Oh, I'm actually getting high on these oxytocin rushes that I have. I feel better. I'm connecting more. So
Yes.
it's just experiencing. So that's kind of your gateway drug is empathy, is the gateway
Yes.
drug to actually breaking the pattern of performance addiction. I get it.
And
I read that in your book, but I didn't get it until just this moment. So thank you for
oh, good.
explaining it so well. I like it.
And we break the stress cycle that way. Because
Hmm.
remember, stress produces cortisol. Cortisol reduces empathy. If I'm feeling stressed,
Hmm.
and our nervous systems talk to each other, and I'm feeling stressed with you, tense, my capacity for empathy, my empathic range goes from out here to in here. Now
Hmm.
I have narrow, repetitive thinking. That's what cortisol, that stress hormone, produces.
Hmm.
Narrow, repetitive, obsessive thinking.
Hmm.
When you extend it through empathy, and we're giving and receiving empathy, now we change the brain chemistry to make us feel more comfortable, more secure. We
Hmm.
make a greater bond.
Hmm.
And it's the most essential capacity to develop for a successful professional life as it is for our personal lives.
Hmm. Is particularly needed yesterday. Tax time, CJ, is not pleasant at all. Like my kids were like, "Hey, it's mom," and then I heard the other kid say, "Stop it! She's doing taxes." I think I went from here to like I don't even smaller, like maybe a hair, a sliver of
Right.
hair for empathy. Okay, so I want to talk about catastrophizing because so much time at work is spent catastrophizing, right? We spend a lot of time like looking at worst case scenarios. We do a ton of planning, a lot of the of work effort, especially when you're
Yes.
big corporations, or about essentially catastrophe. It's like visioning, but then catastrophizing. You come up with plans. Why? Because a catastrophe may occur and you need to actually plan around it or plan for success.
Mhm.
But oftentimes, I think people spend less time planning for success and more time planning for catastrophizing. So, what is catastrophizing? Is that actually a psychological term, or is that a behavioral cognitive thing, or what is it?
Well, when we talk about cognitive behavioral therapy, basically, I emphasize that in the book because it emphasizes cognitive distortions that we learn early in life. So,
Mm,
what if you grow up in an environment where your parents are catastrophizing all the time, or your
right,
mother, CJ, I don't want you to go out, it's raining.
right,
CJ, I don't want you to go into town because who knows who could be there.
right.
Oh, I don't want you to drive the car alone. You'll have to wait for me because, I don't know. It's snowing.
You've
Or,
met my parents?
yeah. Yes, I have. Actually, they called me before the show, so they wanted me to
Must
make
have.
progress.
They must have. Well, and I have that because I have my two parents immigrated because of the Cultural Revolution from China.
Yes,
So,
yes,
they had everything ripped away from them in their early adult lives and had to start all over again. And so they really did have a catastrophe that happened.
yes,
And
yes,
during their lives, during when they were in mainland China, they lived in 5 or 6 different houses. I kept them buying a house. That area would get takeover. They bought another house. And so they literally had catastrophes. So
yes.
it wasn't as if they were being unreasonable. Given their life experience, lots of catastrophes could happen. But that was my life, the one that you just explained.
Well, that's very important, though, because, CJ, because they had a real catastrophe.
Mm-hmm.
Catastrophizing is imagining them. And much of our stress is produced by what we imagine, not what's happening in reality.
Mm-hmm.
So if we come from an experience where we experienced catastrophes, like your parents really did, it's not made
Yeah.
up, it was real.
Yeah.
But then how do you not transfer that to your current life?
Mm-hmm.
How do you not pass that on to your children? Because we would need to realize through empathy, because empathy is very truth oriented, that
Mm-hmm.
there isn't a catastrophe today. There was a
Mm-hmm.
catastrophe yesterday. We're in a different environment. We're in a different country. We're in a safer place. Hopefully, we're in a safer
Mm-hmm.
place. So
Right.
it's teaching us the cognitive distortions. Really, what they do is they make us perpetuate the past. They make us perpetuate the past. When we use empathy, we're trying to put our conditioning aside and saying, what's the truth today? Not putting old faces on new faces.
Right.
So really trying not to just transfer everything that traumatized us in the past, the brain holds on to
Right.
because it's trying to protect us.
Right.
And then when we see something even close to it, we overreact again and then we have stress.
So is the root cause conditioning again, or is there? So in my an early part of my career, and I hear a lot of times when I'm coaching people that they have I'm afraid of this. Oh my God, I hate doing public presentations, or oh my gosh, I have a big project coming up, or oh my gosh, I'm going to be doing an interview and I'm just so awful on interviews, or I'm so awful at taking standardized tests. It's this kind of catastrophizing. And some of them are, they just maybe had one experience, but it was bad enough that they now catastrophize anytime something even remotely similar to that happens. Is
Right.
that the root cause of it, or what's the root cause of
Yes,
it?
it's the hurt or humiliation that was initially experienced your first time on your show.
Right.
Yeah, I'm sure you weren't as good as you are now.
Yeah.
Okay, so rather than you seeing that as a process,
Right.
first tennis lesson, first radio show, first time I speak in public.
Right.
It's a process. People who speak in public all the time,
Hmm.
it's amazing. Yeah, I only used to speak maybe a couple of times a year.
Yeah.
Then when I publish a book and I'm doing it more often, it's like, what's the big deal? But if I don't do it for a year,
Right.
because I don't tend to do it regularly when I haven't got a book that's out in the public at the moment.
Right.
Then I get away from it. Then when I start again, I'm anxious again until I get comfortable again. But once you do it you've got to be in a process.
Right.
A lifelong learner appreciates a process.
Hmm.
Perfectionists don't.
Right.
You got to get it right the first time, or it's humiliating. So if somebody asks you a question, a geography question, or an engineering question, or a computer question, and you don't know the answer, a perfectionist feels embarrassed. And I
Right.
and say to them, what are you? Is IT your background? No, no, I'm a chemist. So why should you know the answer to that question? Well, because it's
Mm,
embarrassing that I didn't. But you're not even in that area. Why
right.
in the world would you think you should have an answer?
Mm,
Perfectionists, you have to answer everything.
right.
You have to know everything so that you're never in the position to be hurt again.
Right. Right.
That's the object of perfectionism.
Right.
I'll never go back to my childhood hurts because I'll perfect myself. I'll speak perfectly, look perfectly, and perform perfectly so nobody can criticize me and
Ah,
nobody
I
can
see.
hurt
So
me.
that, so then, so that because, so the, if you have perfectionism as kind of like the base level layer on there, and then you make a mistake, then you feel awful about it, and then you're going to catastrophize about those mistakes going
Yes.
forward. Okay.
You
Eh,
make a mistake and you think you are a mistake.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. The,
Rather than in a learning process, you have to make mistakes. You have to be bad to get good.
I'm actually I don't catastrophize that much, but I have learned it in my conditioning. It's funny because I did a set of PowerPoints that I thought at the time were really good. I'm like, these PowerPoints are really good, and then the second time I looked at them, I'm like, they're not that good. And then I went through and revised them again. And then the third time I went and revised them again. And then the fourth time I went back and revised them again. And finally, the fourth time around, it took me a little while to figure this out. I thought, those first set of slides I thought were perfect. And here I am on the fourth set of slides. So really, are they getting any more perfect? Like, is there a perfect, that was perfect at that moment. And it really felt perfect at that moment. And this fourth iteration feels perfect at this moment. But really, the first one was fine. Like, no, everyone went to the presentation. They enjoyed it. They really liked it. And the second one, I thought, but, I had a couple pieces of feedback. So I thought, well, I'm going to address that feedback in the second slide and the third slide and then the fourth slide. And I'm actually getting to the point that I can't think of huge changes that I'm going to make out of them. But I do think that, what's my point? I don't know what my point is. I think the point is that you're saying that you get there is no perfection. It's just a process of getting better and better and putting yourself out there.
I think you're realizing that the more you look at it, the more you listen to your performance, the more critical you're becoming.
Yeah.
It's sort of like what happens when you look in the mirror too long?
Yeah.
Usually not good things.
No,
I always tell
knows
people,
every single
take a
pore in your
shower,
body.
blow
Yeah.
your hair dry, get ready and go. Don't study yourself. I think I mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned last time when we talked about my client who's a world-class musician, but he's extremely critical of himself. Did I
Hmm.
mention that story
No.
about he
No.
okay, so he said, I finally understand what you mean about old conditioning and about the perfectionistic eye. I said, what do you mean? He said, I was listening to one of my favorite stations and I was listening to this performance, and this disc jockey played four songs in a row by this artist, and I said, "Oh my God, he is unbelievable! He's unbelievable! Who is this?" It was him from a recording he had made in 1982.
Wow.
He said, as
Oh.
soon as he said my name, I heard the imperfections in what was played.
Oh my gosh. How revealing is
He said,
that?
I felt so low and I thought of you immediately. That's what
Wow.
you're trying to get me to understand. As soon as I knew it was me, it wasn't very good. I could hear the imperfections in the playing.
Right. But when he heard it without knowing it was him, he
He
thought it
thought it
was
was he
actually.
thought it was wonderful
Isn't that fantastic? Wow. That's a huge gift to get that.
because he was hearing it objectively as a
Mm-hmm.
very experienced talent
Mm-hmm.
objectively.
Mm-hmm.
Now the ability to be objective was gone. Now he's subjective. Oh, it was me. Oh,
Right. Now that I heard these six flaws. That's
yeah,
just interesting.
yeah.
Okay, so what you're saying is what I wrote down as notes from the book. So, you're ignoring the positive, and then the other thing is you're engaging in mind reading. So in that example of the music, instead of seeing all the beautiful things that happened when he was listening to the music initially before he knew it was him, he was ignoring all the positives. And what is the engaging in mind reading part?
Mind reading is I'm looking at you and I'm imagining. I believe based on my previous sensitivities. Remember putting old faces on new faces. You're nodding like that, and I think it's because you think I'm stupid. You think I'm not very intelligent. You think that
Mm.
I'm not very insightful. I can tell by the way you're looking. Yeah, you're denying it, but I know how you feel. That's mind reading.
Okay, so
I'm so
catastrophizing is,
sensitive
yeah,
about how I'm perceived
right.
that as I can't really focus on what I'm saying because I'm kind of speaking, but I'm reading you at the same time
Oh, wow.
because I'm so afraid of the disapproval, the rejection that I experienced earlier in life. So I'm mind reading. You
Oh,
frown, and I think you don't like me, but you've really got a headache. You
right,
know, you have a certain mannerisms that look like my mother's mannerism, and I
right,
think you're disgusted with me, or
right,
whatever it is.
right. Yeah, I used to have a girlfriend in college, and she said, everyone always looks at me. And I said, no one looks at you. I mean, no offense.
That really helped her.
I said, everyone is in their own world worrying about how other people are looking at them. They're
Yes.
more concerned about what people are thinking about them when they're looking at them than looking at you. I mean, that's the irony. So you really have nothing to like stop being so self-conscious. And she's like, no, I really feel like everyone is looking at me. And I said, okay, so this is so mean. So we were walking down the quad, and she was saying something else where it's like she was catastrophizing about how everyone was looking at her, and I was going like this. I was like sitting there making faces. I was pointing to her so she really knew what it looked like when everyone was looking at her. And then and I don't think she noticed a difference because I thought if you really want to know what it looks like when someone's looking at you, just I'm like,
Yeah.
I was just making these awful
Yeah.
faces and pointing to her, and she was so wrapped up in her mind, catastrophizing about what
Yes.
people would think about her that I don't even think she noticed there was a difference. And I'm just so mean, but I was just laughing my head off because I thought now people actually are looking at you, and there's no difference in your mind about how much you were looking at before or
Right.
now.
Right.
Um, so what can people do if they catastrophize? So they can think about the positive, and how do they
Well,
go get out of the mind reading piece?
well, we need feedback from other people. For instance, say you were talking to that friend again,
Hmm.
and you sat down for lunch, and you said, I know that you really believe that people are looking at you. I believe you. I don't
Hmm.
believe that it's actually happening, but I believe you. And I believe that it's not happening from what's in front of you. I think it's coming from what's behind you. And you
Hmm.
need to uncover that and work through it so that you can see reality in the present accurately.
Hmm.
That would be an empathic comment on your end.
Versus the thing I did.
Not to be critical.
Okay.
You were being a typical friend. I'm just saying
No, I'm just joking. I'm
if we
joking.
practice,
I did it in college, so I just didn't know any better.
you were young. You were young
I
and
was young
inexperienced.
and
Right. But
inexperienced.
really, because when what happens to people a lot is when I'm fixated and I say, I know people don't like the way I look. I know I'm not attractive, whatever it is. And then people say, okay, oh yes, you are. And we get in an argument rather than saying, where do you think that's coming from?
Hmm. Oh,
Where,
that's good. Yeah,
where do
I
you
like
think
that.
that thought is coming from? Like my musician friend,
Hmm.
where was that coming from? That as soon as you knew it was you, it wasn't a good recording
Mm-hmm.
because it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't about the recording. Because when you did
Right.
know it was you, it was great.
Right. It's
So
digging into the background. Yeah.
what's behind you? Let's get to what's behind you.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
That's what empathy does. Empathy opens up the door to what's interfering so that we can see the truth about ourselves.
Mm. Mm. So just a simple question of what's getting curious about, like, I'm wondering where that's coming from, because it is something. So when you're saying behind you, it's probably something in their past, so it's trying to get a sense. Is that what you mean behind them? Like, what's
Yes,
happening in their
yes,
past? What
yes,
happened in
yes.
your past that is bringing forth this idea that you're not beautiful or you're.
Yeah, where's that coming from? Because when you know people for a long time, like
Mm.
I'll say that I said, you told me that when you were 16. I have friends who say that now. I said, I remember you saying that when we were teenagers,
Mm-hmm.
and now you're
Mm.
48. You're saying the same thing. Don't you realize that? When you were younger,
Mm.
I wish I was younger. No, when you were younger, you were saying the same thing because you were looking into the same mirror.
Right.
Those mirrors we look into when we're young,
Right.
the mirrors of our parents, our family, our teachers, our coaches, to indicate to us who we are. If you look in a cracked mirror, if you're my mother and you're a critical person and you criticize me, I don't know you're a critical person. I think it's something wrong with me.
Right.
So I
Right.
write the story that I don't measure up.
Right.
So now I've got to go
Uh,
do other things to try to compensate for that.
right.
But as an adult, we have to unlearn some of that distorted perceptions that we
Right.
had. Maybe my mother was a critical person. You know what? Your mother was critical of everybody.
Right. Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
she's just a critical woman.
Yeah.
So when you're 3 years old and you're 5 years old and you're 7 years old, you don't know that it's your mother. You think
Mm.
it's you. The person I
Mm.
want the most love from in the world is criticizing me. So I don't measure up. I'm not very good.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, that's really interesting. I had a critical mother, and just until this moment, I hadn't even thought about that. I had a critical. I know that my mom was critical, and relative to other moms, she was critical. But then when you recolor the past based on that information, it changes a lot. Like, oh, okay, so
Yes.
I was a little kid, assuming that that person was just my mom, not realizing that she was critical. That just kind of unlocked it, like, aha, like I've known that for a while. But just piecing that together is really interesting, I think. Just because as kids, we're so innocent and we just don't know. So then we walk away with conclusions, incorrect conclusions about who we are as a person.
That are embedded deeply in our brain because
Mm,
our brain records what hurts us more than what pleases us.
mm-hmm.
You ask people who are 50, 60, 70, or 80, tell me all the times you were complimented in life. Oh, I don't know. Tell me all the times you were criticized in life and it hurt you to the core. They remember each time. I
Yeah,
can go back to when I was 6 years old and I
right.
can tell you what people, we record those in a deeper part of the brain supposedly to protect us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What happens is it leads to distortions. What I
Mm,
try to teach people is we all write a story about ourselves early in life that's part fiction because
mm,
we're not capable of writing an accurate story about ourselves at that age. We
right.
have to rewrite it as adults.
Mm-hmm.
Cannot, absolutely cannot do it alone.
Mm, mm. Yeah.
Feedback other rational, objective people who have empathy. That's why in the book, at the end of each chapter, I have a take action section,
Right.
which asks people to do some of the journaling, but then to take it and confide in someone close to you and get
To get a
so that
second opinion, right? Yeah.
yeah,
So you
yeah.
don't get stuck in your own self and your own conditioning. Okay, personalization. Uh, I'm really have a lot of this blame and overgeneralizing. I do
Mhm,
it to myself and then I do it to others. So,
mhm.
what what happens? Why is this happening to me?
It's
Why
this.
am I built this way?
It's based on, excuse me, the same example that we were just talking about. Okay,
Okay.
you're the critical mother.
Right.
I'm the 4 year old.
Right.
So you criticize me over and over again. So I believe it's me. So now I can't differentiate from what's a situation and what's personal as an adult.
Oh.
So I have a crazy boss. You're a crazy boss.
Mhm.
You're sadistic. You're kind of cruel,
Right.
and you're that way with me. So I take it personally rather than realizing you're sadistic. You're a cruel person.
Right.
Everybody in the department knows that.
Right.
So I wouldn't take that personal.
Right.
But if I've learned it early in life, critical mom, and then I believe that I'm less than because of that.
Mhm.
So I'm much more sensitive as soon as I sense a little bit of it. As
Right.
soon as we sense a little bit of the situation that really hurt us, we read in, we personalize. We have to
Ah.
learn that some things in life are just situational. We had a reorganization. I happen to get you as my manager, unfortunately.
Right.
Okay. So you're going to be a pain for a while now.
Right. Right. I
It's
s-
not me though.
right. And I see that myself because someone will do something, anything like my kid will fall down on it. It's like, oh, it's my fault. Like it's like, how is that my fault? And
Yeah.
I literally have gotten to the point where I catch myself like, wait a second, That's not my fault that they fell. Like they fell because there was a, a crack in the sidewalk and has nothing to do with me. But I would say, "Oh, I'm so sorry that you fell." Or and somehow I feel bad about it because I should have been watching you so that I saw the crack so you wouldn't have fallen and tripped. And so you're saying that's a product of overcritical parents. So someone is actually triggered towards like constantly like there must be something wrong with me. That's kind of the hypnosis, so to speak, of when I see something happen, oh, it must be my fault. Something's wrong with me.
Let me give you an example of how that can be formed and how empathy would allow that not to be formed.
Yeah.
Okay, when my youngest daughter, Elena, one of the most beautiful people in the world, inside and out, honestly, objectively,
Yeah.
as her father. When she was 3 years old, I'm coming downstairs. She walks into a coffee table and stubs her toe. And she said, "Daddy, why did you do that to me?" Okay, because 3-year-olds project out blame.
Right.
Okay, now I could have said, "You little, what do you
Right.
mean? I didn't do anything. You did it to yourself. Why don't you take responsibility for yourself?"
Right.
What would that have done to her? Humiliation.
Yeah.
Instead, I picked her up and I hugged her and I said, "Can you show me how Daddy took your legs when I was on the second floor and you were on the first floor and I banged them into the coffee table?" "Well, Daddy, you did." I said, I give her a kiss on the cheek and I said, "Well, but I want to see how I could do that because I'm on the second floor in our bedroom and you're down here and I hear a bang and you're crying and somehow Daddy made that happen." "Well, I guess, well, somebody made it happen." So we're having a little interchange that doesn't make her feel embarrassed. That
Right.
doesn't make her feel she's a mistake for making a mistake. It
Mm.
helps her take responsibility without humiliation.
Oh, I love that. I love that because I have a dear friend who was always trying to guilt me, and because I'm so susceptible to guilt, I kind of smell it 1,000 miles away. So she will say, "Oh, well, you don't have to call me." And I said, "Are you trying to guilt me? Because that's not going to work. Don't do that." And she's like, "I'm not guilting you." I'm like, "Mm-hmm, you are. The way that you're talking about it, it just doesn't
Yeah.
work for me." But but I think a better solution based on your conversation with your 3-year-old would be, well, I'm wondering how that happened. Like, how is this, how, it seems like you're implying that this is maybe somehow I'm responsible for us not getting together, even though each time she calls me, I'm pretty much readily get together with her all the time. But
Yeah.
somehow she's like, we need to be better about getting together with each other. You know that? And I was like, oh, okay. Well, in what way do I need to get better at doing that? How am I, so I think getting curious about it and being empathetic, curious is probably a lot better solution than the way that I executed it. Thank you
The
for so
heart
many tips.
the heart of empathy is curiosity.
Yeah,
Open-ended questions that truly are curious.
right.
How did you determine that?
Yeah. How did you
One of my
determine?
patients said to me the other day, she asked for an extra session. Okay, she comes every week. She wanted a second session. She's
Right,
not in crisis.
right,
Okay, but and I have some people who are.
right,
Okay,
right.
so she came in and she said, "Well, you didn't call me last week." And I don't think you really. I think you stopped caring. I think last session was too much for you. You stopped caring. And I said,
Oh,
"So how did you determine that?"
hmm.
"Well, you didn't call me." I said, "That's correct." "Well," I said, "Well, what?" "Well, why didn't you call me?" "Because I didn't have any cancellations." "But you knew I wanted to talk to you." I said, "Was it an emergency that I should tell someone that I am seeing to not come so I could see you? I mean, what do you think? How did
Hmm.
you determine that I didn't care for you?
Hmm.
When you were here, did I seem like I didn't care for you?" "No, you seemed like you cared, but then you didn't call me." I said, "I know, we've talked about that. So when I don't have an extra session or a cancellation, couldn't you have worked later?" Um, Actually, I could have. So I didn't work extra late. So that meant I didn't care. Oh, so you
Hmm.
could. So you could have. Yes, I could have. But if I did, I wouldn't be taking care of myself and my family, and I wouldn't be totally present when I meet with you if I keep doing that.
Hmm. Wow.
But when you've had an emergency, I worked late, didn't I? Yes. Okay.
Wow. You are the pro. Of course you are. I just want like I kind of want to have you in my back pocket next time to just throw up the different questions to ask people. Those are
Well, see, I'm going to
That's
guilt you to
beautiful.
have me on again.
I'd love to have you on. And you know how easy I am to be manipulated. Just be
If
critical.
you really cared, you would have scheduled another time. But here you
This
have
is
me
what you
on
showed you.
just twice, and I'm supposed to just go away. You take my book and run. So, okay, what kind of person are you, CJ? After all,
All right, I'll have you on.
I hope the people who listen to you are listening to this and really know the kind of person you are. Yeah.
I'm so easily manipulated. Seriously, you could just say, God, I really don't feel like that was a good show, or we really was unhappy with these kind of things. I'm like, really? Oh, it's my fault. I'll go fix it all. As if there's anything to fix. Okay, last one, worrying. These are all my complexes, but they're also in the book. No wonder I'm so stressed out all the time.
It's that damn book that's making you stressed. You're reading it,
I was
see?
just reading it going like, I have all these things. No wonder I'm stressed. Okay, so worrying, it's the inner punitive voice. And so that seems to be related to the critical parent thing. Is that related to that or
Yes.
something different?
Because the worrying comes, the chapter on self-talk.
Yeah.
Self-talk, really, we internalize the voices that we heard earlier in life. And at some point, we have to understand that whose voice is it? And if we have
Right.
a punitive voice, it's usually not, children are not born criticizing themselves.
Mm-hmm.
We learn from how people, in the example I gave of my daughter, and I don't mean to imply that I'm a wonderful parent or anything, I've certainly made mistakes, but in that situation, I didn't, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But you can imagine if I was critical of her, how that starts to develop a punitive conscience. What's the matter with me? I'm so stupid. I bumped into the table and blah, 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 blah.
Mm.
Rather than an understanding, if you have understanding from outside you, then you develop an understanding internal voice. So you make
Mm.
a mistake and you say, the bottom line is people like people who make mistakes. You
Yeah.
know what's likable about you is you're very honest about yourself. You have a sense of humor and you have a desire to learn
Mm-hmm.
and be better and grow. I mean, you're very easy to talk to because of that.
Yeah. I'm full of flaws, and people love that.
You know why? Do you know why?
Why?
Because we're all full of flaws.
Yes. That's nice. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
funny because I get
And
that.
it makes you feel more comfortable with someone who can openly talk about it instead of pretending. Well, that's CJ on the radio.
Right.
Dr. Sarah McCauley, I'd like to ask you a few questions. I mean,
Right.
that's not very comfortable. I've been there with people. I mean,
Yeah.
you start to feel a little tight because our nervous systems, we have this remote control, we talk to each other.
Right.
So
Right.
it's relaxing to talk to you because you're authentic.
Ah,
And
interesting.
authenticity attracts. It relaxes us.
Hmm.
It changes our brain chemistry.
Hmm.
So now we feel you've got flaws, you're exposing them, you're not pretending, you're not projecting an image. Oh, I don't have to either. Oh, great. I can relax.
That's
We're in the
interesting.
family room, not in the living room.
Yeah. I didn't understand that was the equation that I was using. I mean, I'm just being myself. It's not like I'm trying to do
I
anything. I'm not trying to
understand
be
that.
vulnerable or authentic. But people here, they always say to me, "You're authentic," and I have like, okay, I guess. Like, who else would I be? But I think, if I'm not authentically me, then who else would I be? But then I think that what you're saying is that you're okay with being flawed. You're okay with whatever. I mean, I feel awful when I make mistakes, but I make mistakes, and that happens. So, yeah, that's interesting. And you're saying that that way of being helps people relax. Because it's funny, my husband says to me, "Well, did you meet so and so?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah, he's hilarious." And he's like, "Really? That guy's always so serious when he's around me." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, we were talking about his trip to blah, blah, blah. And he was talking about this and that. And he just had me on the floor laughing." And he's like, "Really?" And he said, I said, "Yeah." And he's like, "Wow." So for whatever reason, something happens when I talk to people and I have no idea because I'm not trying to do anything. And they're way funnier. That's one thing. So maybe it's just the authenticity piece. I don't know.
Authenticity takes great courage. You may not always feel that because you do it naturally.
Oh.
But so many people are pretending, trying to
Mm.
project the image that I think you want. So
Mm.
I'm mind reading, right? I'm trying to imagine what you want, and I'm
Right.
trying to be what I think is going to win you over. And while I'm doing that, I'm not authentic. And
Hmm.
you sense it.
Right.
So you know that the likelihood that you can be authentic with me is not very high.
Right.
So
Right.
now we're tense, and now
Oh.
we're stressed, and
Oh.
we elicit the stress hormone, and
Oh.
now we feel kind of narrow in our perception of each other.
No, that's interesting,
We
and I
don't
think it's
connect
related to
very
trust, isn't it? Because you
sure.
trust someone. Because I used to do business development and sign contracts, and people would always say, "I just really trust her," and I really wasn't doing anything per se. Like I wasn't using NLP techniques or whatever people use to be trustworthy. It was just something that happened. But I think maybe that's what it is. That when you have that, when you're with someone who's authentic, then you can feel like you can have more trust in them, and you can just reveal more of yourself because you know that they'll love and
Sure.
accept whatever shows up. That's interesting. Thank you. That was You're good at what you do. Seriously, for you.
So are you. So are you.
You've nailed it. Okay, so we're gonna have you come back because you guilted me to talk about the power of empathy, your other book. Wow. Um, any closing words on the stress solution? Anything else that you want to tell listeners out there?
Just that, stress is very prevalent in our society right now, and we can learn how to be calmer and change our brain chemistry naturally if we do the work, if we're diligent about doing the work.
Yeah.
I wrote the book because it is more of a workbook, and
Mm-hmm.
if you follow the some of the advice and relate to some of the stories, which I think people will, and confide in some people close to you, you can reduce stress. But stress has a lot to do with the way we perceive. And
Mm,
the way we perceive is much based on how we grew up and what we were exposed to and what we
mm,
came to think of ourselves early in life. And
mm,
most of the time, in my experience, it's not true.
mm-hmm.
If it were true, I wouldn't be here.
Mm. It's the ultimate gift of freedom, right? Because we to me in my frame, I just think, wow, that would truly give someone freedom if you knew that all the conditioning that you had was just things that you at your younger self misunderstood at that age, and now as an adult you can just re-examine all of them and do the questions that you have at the end of the book. What you're talking about is you have an explanation of some of the ideas in here, and at the very end, you have journal questions, you have take action, and then you talk about cognitive distortion so that people are more familiar with that thing. So this is a chapter on combating performance addiction that talks about those things, and then a questionnaire even in this case. So it is a really good workbook, I think. And I don't know, I everyone has to. It's just not me, right? Performance anxiety, performance addiction, catastrophizing, personalization, worrying. Everyone, I think, has some aspect of that inside of them.
Sure, sure.
So thank you so much. This is a really
You're
wonderful book,
you're
The Stress
welcome.
Solution by Arthur Sierra McCauley. I got it.
You said my name
I did
correctly.
it. Thank you so much. It means so much to me that you're listening to the show and love your support in any way by giving me comments below or to subscribe to the show or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.